a group that seems relatively small, has a lot of good features, at least in the males, and yet we still have a couple little tight groups that sometimes are hard to identify. I think in some cases, the most difficult thing for people starting out is to identify it as a Hoplitis at all. It has two submarginal cells. It's got the scopal hairs underneath the abdomen. It looks both megachile-like and maybe osmia-like. So if you, to separate from megachile, you just look at the tarsal claws and there's a pad between it, right? So that makes it not megachile because they have no pad. And to make it not osmia, first of all, it's black and there's not that many osmias that are black. And I should point out that out in the west, there are bright green Hoplitis, just to confuse things. And there might be some blue ones for all I know. But in the east, it's all black. And if you look on the scutum, the parapsidal line is clearly visible. It's not super long, but it's not nothing, as osmia basically is, which is only 2 or 3 dots wide. So that's the summary there. I'm going to jump in here, share my screen, and we'll look at the two most common species in the east, which is pilosifrons and producta. In particular, the females are tricky to identify. In fact, most of the time I didn't identify them at all until Mike Arduzer came up with a really classy way to tell them apart, which we'll talk about here in a second. Okay, so let me share my screen. And if you haven't pulled up the Discover Life guide, you probably should. Just has a lot of the characters, and we'll talk about those characters on there. You can click the Has button to get more details. Okay, I'm focusing on getting the screen up with the lovely, I think we're up now, with the lovely, sorry, I've got a cough, not COVID, tested last night. The lovely new microscope screen that we have. So in looking at this, what we're looking at is a male producta. Is that right? Are we looking at producta? Yeah, we're looking at a male producta. So the first thing to look at in males are what's going on with the antenna. And when we look at this one, you see that the antennae, while maybe a little more robust in lots of species, it also has this little hook at the end. In this case, the hook isn't particularly pronounced. In some of the pilosifrons and producta, I think truncata has this too. It's very strongly curved over at the end. So it necks down to a small point and curves over at that point. And that's a really good discriminating feature for a number of species, including producta and pilosifrons. So once you see that, you can look in the guide to look for additional features, but we got several more things to look at here. I forget the exact stream to get to producta, but what we're going to look at is a feature that is something that you would probably want to look at in almost any male to see what's going on. Some have next to nothing going on in the sternites on S2. So S1 is hidden in this picture. These are the legs. Here's S2 and producta. So I think of producta in the sense of the word produced. So this is a chunk of a segment that's highly produced. I've heard it described as bonnet-like. So you have a face that's relatively flat that is facing to the posterior, and then you have a slope off this side that is the bonnet-like part of it up front. And this is just, I think it's obvious in here, this is sticking way out from the underside of the specimen. So it's pretty dramatic. So we'll see its sister, which is pilosifrons, and it also has a produced area on S2, not as dramatic. again, one of the problems with these things is, well, if you only have one specimen and it's happens to be pilosifrons, you might look at that and say, oh, it's highly produced. I think it must be producta. But only when you see producta versus pilosifrons do you realize that this one's really, really produced. I think we do some attempts at describing the differences in the shapes, and we're going to show both here, and versus the less dramatic version in pilosifrons. So another aspect, and this was used in Mitchell, but is actually very difficult to see, I think, which is on T7. I'm going to get a different view of this, but I'm just showing you. And T7 often has really good characters, and we'll see several in several of the other species about just the shape. They're often dramatically different. Then, of course, within a sister taxa of any particular one, they can look pretty similar. But between the taxa groups, there's a fairly dramatic difference. Where the heck did my specimen go? Oh, there it is, out of focus. So I'm turning it upside down. As usual, the specimen curls up a little bit. I'm going to change the view here in a second, but here's T6, T7. You can see already it's very triangular and sharp in contrast to its sister pilosifrons. Producta is thought to have a more wedge-shaped. So here we go, very triangular, whereas in pilosifrons, I'm going to magnify this a bit. In pilosifrons, the tip would more quickly narrow down to they would not have this uniform slopes on either side. The triangle would not be so equilateral, and it's going to narrow down to a point. But again, that's clear when you have long series of specimens. It's less clear when you just have one. So these are the kinds of things you use in combination to bring up your confidence level if you don't have a lot of specimens. And that's why using a guide like Discover Life is important, because you have, and to use it well, you have quite a number of different options to get to the same answer, and you want to take them so that you increase the probability of getting the right answer. In a dichotomous key, these work well too, and you have a much smaller set of options, but you have to get them right, and sometimes they're hidden. All right, so I'm going to flip to producta or pilosifrons. Hey guys. So in pilosifrons, we have a specimen here. And so we'll take a look first at, let's take a look at the antennae again, since it's good to see several versions of it. So here's the antenna, and let's change the direction. We're going to look at how the tip angles in. It's not a 90-degree angle, but it's pretty dramatic. And part of that is that it goes down to a point. So it's not doing a 90-degree, but it's doing what, 30 degrees, let's call it, and it becomes small and actually pointed and narrows at the same time. So what a lovely character. We wish all of them were like that. So, but that doesn't eliminate our friend producta. So now we're going to look at S2, which you will see is sticking out. And if I can get the view correctly, you will see that it is not as dramatically sticking out. But still, again, if you just had this specimen, would you know necessarily? So what you're seeing is that it's more mound-like rather than bonnet-like. So this front face also has a slope to it instead of a sheer face, flattened face facing towards the posterior. It's got that. It is quite dramatically sticking out from the base of the sternites, but and is not as tall. But again, if you'd only have one, how would you know? So I'm going to angle it a little bit more. And you can still see this more mound-like shape to it.
Sam, we
Okay,
have a question in the chat. Do we
yeah.
want to clarify, does that antenna hook say that it is Hoplitis?
I would say that in the East, the answer is yes. But just to be clear, and we'll see examples of this, that antenna hook is only on one, it's probably a subfamily of Hoplitis. So it's not all Hoplitis having that hook. But if you see a bee that has that hook, then I want to say it is Hoplitis. I could be wrong. Someone might come up with an example of where I'm incorrect about that. So now let's take a look at the mythical T7, which should narrow down more quickly, still roughly triangular shape, but not as equilateral. So I've always had problems with this, so I'm not going to shame anyone, including myself, for not really seeing a huge difference. So I think it's the kind of thing, if you look at things in comparison, I'm going to change the lighting a little bit here. You will see some differences. It's overall narrower. I'm going to shift it a little bit so that you can see perhaps the tip slightly better. Tip's, of course, hairy, so hard to see. But I think what Mitchell was trying to get at was that instead of having a almost equilateral triangle type of thing going on here, it's narrower and the tip narrows further, so it's less of a, I don't know what to call it, complete triangle. It also, if you can see, it flares a little bit out at the end. I'm always had troubles with this just because when you're only looking at the specimen, it's like, well, is it or isn't it? So, but the combination here with that and the S2 character should do it.
It might be worth mentioning that these tend to really like to curl up and makes between especially on T7, the hairs there really, really hard to tell the difference sometimes.
Yeah, so that is true. So a lot of times in, and I would say probably in osmia too, the males really curl the abdomen over, hiding a lot of the sternite features. I guess a lot of male bees do this too. So a lot of times it's frustrating because you want a nice male sternite character and it's all curled up. However, I have to say that with a little bit of futzing around, let's see, I want to make sure I get this in the right box. A little bit of futzing around, you often can find just the right view from the angle. That's why you're using your fingers. Just the right view to sneak a look in there. And you'll see when we talk about osmia, a lot of times you're sneaking a look to get the propodial pits or the base of T1, which often is disguised by the fact that the abdomen is bent up. So there's pros and cons of doing traditional layout of specimens. So sometimes, like in osmia, if you do a traditional layout, then the characters that are between the thorax and the abdomen are hidden because the two segments have been brought together too much. Whereas in their natural saggy state, let's call it, a lot of times you can see right in between there. So also using your fingers is clearly has advantages here to get to see just the right angle to see through hairs and legs and rolled up body parts. Okay, so now I want to go to the females of the same species rather than continuing through the males, which we'll go back to, just because the females have been trickier, and we're talking about the two most common species. So I'm going to stay with pilosifrons right now, and we will look at the characters. So both producta and pilosifrons in the female are pretty, I hesitate to call it bland, but they seem to be kind of bland species. So there's not a lot of feature to them that really stands out. I'm going to talk about the clipial characters, which help define it, and the tergite ST8, or is it T7? Yeah, T7 features that help with it. It's a little more subtle. So when you're looking from above, you don't see that there's any particular things going along with this edge. This edge is relatively straight. The antenna, lovely antennal characteristics on the males do not exist in the females. They all have about the same standard operating antennae things going on. Oops, I'm going the wrong direction. So there are features regarding the rim of the specimens of Hoplitis females that are addressed by looking at them straight on. So to orient, mandibles here closed over each other. Here is the tongue, and I think, yeah, that's the tongue. The labral process, the labrum is hidden underneath here. It's actually quite long, and that's a good character if you can see it, which most of the time you can't, unless you spread the mandibles. A good practice if you have the time. So let's zoom in here to my max amount, and we're going to see, I need to change the amount of light on this. I think that might be sufficient. So what we're looking at here is the very rim. So it's not thick, it's quite thin, and it undulates a little bit. And that's a characteristic of this particular group of Hoplitis females. Nothing dramatic, but some of the other species have a bunch of different features here that this species does not have. Now, the other sort of big separating character for females in terms of carving off a couple big groups is the shape of the T7 in profile, in particular down by the rim area, if I can find it. So we're looking at the abdomen, and we're looking at the last segment, so T7, and I'll change the view here a little bit, but T7 in some species is basically just straight, like most species is a straight, either straight line or slightly convex profile to right to the rim. And here what you're seeing is it is slightly convex, and then it kicks out, and there is a rim that is bent back very sharply, and we have, I forget what the different levels are, but we mention that it's important as to whether it's bent back, but also to what degree it's bent back. So in some cases, what you're looking at is a greater angle here and than in others. So there's a little bit of importance in taking your time and defining the degree of bentedness of the angle on the rim of the last sternite. I think for now, those are the female characters that we're going to bother with, because the the specimen is not got, I mean, there's not a lot of dramatic features here.
Hey,
And
Sam,
that should, yeah.
What about the hairs on, I can't remember if it's the underside of T6 or S6? Whether or not there are hairs along the rim, like inside where the stinger is?
That's exactly where we're going.
Okay, just kidding. Bye.
Okay. So now, theoretically, after answering probably a couple more questions, you're going to end up with the, is it pilosifrons or producta thing? And this is something that takes a little bit of effort to see. I'm going to see a couple different views. Hopefully the specimen will behave. I looked at it on the microscope, it was fine. Sorry. But I'm hoping that we can see that pretty easily when we're live here. So what we're looking at is the very rear of the abdomen, T7. Here's the opening. The sting is either in there, retracted, I believe. And this is S7, and this is T7. And you can't see it right yet, but what we're going to look for is on the inside. Okay, so we're not talking about any of the normal outside features. We're talking about the inside of the actual inside of the body cavity, right along the edge of this rim on T7. So right now you can't see anything because we're completely in what I'm not sure what that view would be called. We're looking straight down the barrel, so to speak. So now I'm going to turn it upside down, which you would have to do too, and you would do it in a more nuanced way because you'd be rolling it back and forth in order to get to look in the often. So pretty much always there's a crack in the between the sternite here and the tergite on top, and the opening is opened up a little bit. Now, normally there's almost no reason to look there, and why Mike was looking there is magical, because he found that in pilosifrons there are minute hairs. I'm up at 5. I'm going to up the what am I trying to say? So I'm doing two things at once. I can't talk anymore. I'm going to up the lighting here in a second. But what we're looking for is on the inside, little hairs lining the inside of that. Okay, so, and this is very important because this is how you tell them apart. Really, there was some information, for example, in Mitchell, who does so many things well, that was just too vague in terms of the degree of pitting between the two species. I never was able to figure that one out in absolute terms. So we're now going to click out of here. I'm going to use my understanding of lighting too much. Oops, that's way too much. Okay, that's probably pretty good. We're blowing out some of the highlights, but I really want you to see the hairs in there. Now we're going to go back to full screen. I think we're going back to full screen. We'll have to click in there. Here we go. Okay, so this is as good as I can get it, but there are these little hairs here. We're going to flip to producta, which has no hairs there. Let's see if changing some lighting. So I want you very much to see the fact that there are little hairs, what they look like, and where they're located, because that's your ticket to this most common pair. Okay, so I'm going to take this off. When he told me about this, I was like, thank God. I had a whole set of things I couldn't ID. So now to producta, female, and we will do the same thing. Essentially, they're identical in my mind, except for this feature. Isn't taxonomy exciting? Okay, so here we are. This one in producta, the sting is pointing out. Now I'm going to change the magnification. What a great shot. Okay, so here is a sternite, S7. Here is the top of the, you can barely see it. This is the rim of the turgite, and here's, which is T7, and here's T6 sticking out back here. So take a look. So there are hairs here, right? So you might be like, well, that has hairs, but they are hairs on top of T7. If you look here, again, apologies, I'm at my max magnification. If you look here, there are no hairs on the inside of that rim. See what I'm saying? Any questions now? So it's nothing. It's just really the trick. I know it's frustrating for people when they first start out. It's like, what are we looking at? Where is that? Anyway, with this next iteration of guide development, we hope to get better pictures of all these kinds of things into the guides. So there's your ticket. Any questions on that? Because I'm going to go to other species now and other characters.
Nothing in the chat so far. Here's your chance.
Okay. Should be relatively straightforward. All right. Now, more variation on theme. So here's a different species. It's a northern one, albifrons. I want to say that is the only one with black scopal hair, so that'll alone, I could be wrong, maybe there's something else I just don't see here in the east. We change the lighting. And it's big. It's related to, I believe it's going to be related to spoliata. And maybe it's slightly too much. Okay, we're going to go with that. Looking here to there. There we go. So, nice feature, black scopal hairs.
We have a question real quick.
Yeah.
Is it better then to let Hoplitis females dry curled up, or would the opening still be evident if the abdomen were dried straight out?
Okay, so in our lab, we don't ever position, except under very unusual circumstances, we never position anything except to stick a pin through them or glue them to a pin. So I would say you don't need to. You could if you wanted to, but we essentially don't have any problems. It's always gapped enough to view. Okay, so here.
And Sam, I forgot to grab this species name. What was it?
What we're looking at here is albifrons, a very northern species related to spoliata. So here also, here's the female, rim coming down and angling like that. Dark scopal hairs. You can see more of a dark brown in nature than really black. I'll point out change the view here. The mandibles have 4 teeth, which only a few species have. In this lovely specimen, the mandibles are open. A lot of specimens don't have mandibles open. Good practice, if you have the time, is to flick open in Megachile and Andrina, females at least, flick open the mandibles. Does this look odd to me?
Yeah, you're focused on the coxa.
Oh, that's why. Here we go. To open the mandibles. Now, in this case, they actually weren't completely open, but you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 very clearly. Most of the remaining Hoplitis have only 3 teeth. So there it is. It's a really nice specimen. You can see that the rim here is very arched up, and I believe from on top it's also slightly concave, has a different aspect to it, but the large size and the 4 teeth, along with the shape of the rear end, but in particular the black, is going to be very distinctive. Now, over here, and well, I don't have any males of that one. Let's do spoliata. So I do have spoliata, which is probably in the same subgenus. I'm not 100% sure. And we will see in the female, and then I have a male of that species, which I don't have for albifrons. I think their antennal characteristics are the same, although very which are very dramatic, as you'll see in a second for the males. So the females, basically the same kind of architecture. You can see here, I believe, the 4 teeth, and we always include the very tip as a tooth of the mandibles. Not a great, the hairs are in the way, but 1, 2, 3, 4, and the back and edge is considered a tooth, usually 2. Sometimes it's a little vague as to what's a tooth and not, but in most cases it is, and usually in the guides we tell you about that. So that's the female, very similar, very large, white, as you can see here, a little bit too blown out, but it's very clearly white scopal hairs. Spoliata, not uncommon. Not super common though either. And the male here is where antennae, this is also distinctive for Hoplitis for this particular subgroup. If you see this antennae, you know it's Hoplitis, but you don't know if you have a different shape antennae, it doesn't necessarily make it not Hoplitis. That makes sense. So only some of these groups have this antennae. And let me rotate it a little bit differently here. We bring it around like that. Okay, so magnify this a little. So what we have is a situation. I don't even know if the tip is pointed or not, but here's the head. This is the scape and pedestal, and then here's these antennal segments, and they get dramatically wider, and then they narrow back down. Instead of like normally an antenna in a bee is a tube. So when it's not a tube, then usually you have a good identification character for at least a group of the bees that have that one. So in this case, Nomada has some features like that too. So here, this widening and then narrowing back down, really distinctive. I think maybe in the East only, people can tell me if I'm wrong, maybe only Spoliata and the albifrons have it. So right there pretty much tells you what you have. If we look, though, look quickly on the underside and the very end of T7. Getting it in there. So T7 has a very different shape than what we saw. I have to bend it out a little bit more. Basically, it's truncate and flattened in this species compared to the pointed one we saw in pilosifrons. You can see how much this particular specimen's abdomen has curled up on us. Again, we just let them curl. So if you're looking at Discover Life, you'll see that there is some angles. It's a little bit difficult to see with this lighting. There's some angles, and then it's truncate at the top, and then it goes back down, and it's relatively wide. Nothing at all like we were seeing in the other specimen. Let's see. And then when we look underneath at S2, which I never do because the antennal characters are so good. What do we see? I see some legs. I don't believe there's much of anything under there. I might not bother with this specimen because the legs make it difficult to see, but let's see what we can see from this side. There are things going on in terms of hair placement, which are a couple good characters in there too, but you see no projecting humps in this particular one. What's going on with the other species in terms of why they have such large projecting lumps in the females, I don't know. Sure, it has something to do with mating. Well, I'm not sure, but sure-ish. Okay, we'll go over now to a small species of which I have, it's a small species group, which includes simplex, which I have specimens of, and micheneri and nemophilae, which I don't right at the moment. I think I gave those away. So let's look at the male, since we were just looking at males. So these are much smaller. So just the size characteristics in the guide are going to help you to a great extent here. These are specialists. Someone may have to help me as to what simplex is a specialist on, but tis. So additionally,
which one is this?
This is simplex. And let me straighten it. So one character, I think this probably goes for the group, but again, this is the one species that I come across. Very uncommon, but still it comes across regularly, is this Hoplitis. Why is it moving? So the Hoplitis, there's this brush of thick hairs here towards the, how did I do this? Towards the tip. That's just, it's a very distinct look. I don't know how to describe it. It's very dense and widens and flares out towards the end. But that is something, and when I see that, I'm almost guaranteed that it's simplex. If I'm looking at the antennae, there's no modifications on here. So this antennae is unique or useful in the fact that it's the normal male model there. If we look at the rear and see what we get here, I can take it back down a notch. And we try and go up. There, I believe, should be nothing projecting from underneath. I do not see that. If we look at the backside T7, there's a shape which I think is triangular 2 in this group. Not sure. In a while since I've looked one up, but yeah, I think it's a simple obtuse triangle going on there.
Sam, can you repeat what the group is? So we have simplex. Do you say micheneri? What else?
So yeah, someone who's on the guide can tell us what the subgenus is. These are all, I think, in a subgenera together. Micheneri, nemophilae, which is more western, southwestern, so Texas. Jack Neff helped describe that, and also simplex. So those three are in their own little group of tiny Hoplitis. Also, this character here, I believe, I'd have to look it up again because I just don't look at it enough, but for looking at the mandibles, you see that the mandibular hair here below is quite a bit longer than the width of the abdomen, of the mandible itself. And I can't remember the exact dimensions, but in the guide it will talk about that this is useful in separating things out and has to do with the relative length of the hairs versus the width of the mandible. And I believe it's that these are much longer than the width, and the others would be shorter. So if we look at the female of that same species of simplex, who visits some unknown group of plants, which you can look up on Jared Fowler's website for a lot of details on specialty. And so here is an example of a rear end, and you can see again we get into these subtleties. So in other of the specimens, you have a slightly concave area and then a lip that projects out with like 130 degrees or something. And here you have a more subtle and less dramatic jump in the angle from the of the rim to the main body. There is an angle, but it's not as dramatic as the others. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in there in terms of the females. I can't recall anything right now that I need to talk about. I think it's a relatively plain species. I don't know that there's much going on the clypeus and the rim of the clypeus either. Just looking for my own good. Yep, I don't see anything. Relatively flat. The small side gets rid of a bunch. Okay. Truncata, the last of two, this and anthocopoides I have specimens of. So truncata in the female is distinct in all the Hoplitis because it has a raised ridge down the median plane or the median section of the clypeus. So by raised ridge, we're not talking about the kind of carina or carinate types of things where it's a raised thin edge that you see forming in other parts of the body of other groups. It's this thickened, like molten raised line, like if someone put a line of glue and it hardened down the middle of the clypeus. It's also not necessarily absolutely straight. See if we can, so you can see these when I highlight it in different ways. It's some places broader, some places narrower. It follows some of the lines of the pitting and goes in and out, a little bit blobby sometimes. So that, and the others, it's just uniform pitting, so you don't see anything of that nature. So that tells you have a female truncata. I mean, there's other characters that would narrow it down to groups such as what's going on in the clypeus and what's going on what are the other characters on here? Well, just process of elimination for the rim on T7 and some of the sternite characters, like the fact that the scopal hairs are white. In the male, I believe it does not have any such thing on the clypeus. If we look at the antennal segments, we see relatively narrow ones, and it does look like it narrows down to a point. Again, I'm not 100% clear whether that having that little tiny point that we see here is what's the, whether that's characteristics or whether we have ignored that in the guide. But it doesn't have that, or don't believe it has the rolled over tip. Let me see. Well, maybe it does. So I'd have to look at this a little bit more, but it does look, maybe it is in that same pilosifrons group with the, and producta group with the tip that curls over. It's, now that I've seen this, let me see.
We do have it marked for that.
Okay. So I think the answer is it does have that. Not something I've memorized, but the key character on the males, I think there is absolutely nothing going on the sternites, which would be very different from producta and pilosifrons. And here we actually have a good view of the sternites. No projections there. If we go to the rim of T7, it should show a rounded out truncate edge. So here, and these relatively tame little teeth on T6. So here's T7. And this is very wide, very different from these triangular shaped ones we saw elsewhere. And here's this nice, smooth, broad, convex rim. So the last one we have is anthocopoides. Anthocopoides is, in the scheme of things, a relatively recent invasive, first discovered in New York a while back, upstate New York, and is a specialist on, what is that? Is it Echium? Is Echium vulgare, which is, what's the common name on that? It's purple Viper's bug loss, European invasive species. So we have a specialist on a European weed. How great is that? So we'll look at the male here, and it has a pretty distinct rear end. So it looks like a lot like truncata. There's probably some other characters. There might be even a character guide to separate these two. I'm not sure, but, and then again, the identification summary is often present in on the species page. So here we have something that looks a lot like truncata. So we have a narrow edge there. Sorry, not narrow edge. We have a broad segment and relatively concave, and then little teeth on the far edges. I want to also say that maybe there's another character. I believe there's another character for anthocopoides, which I am not recalling at the moment. Does it have to do with the rim? I believe the antennal segments, let's take a look, unmodified. Although, is that a curve at the very end? I don't think so. We're just going to spin it a little.
Not marked for it.
Okay. And yeah, don't really see that. So normal. And I think there's another character, but I can't recall what it is. In terms of, might have to do with some sternal hair patterns. Vaguely, I've only seen a few specimens of the species. Take the tip off, and then we will have covered specimens that I at least have, and we can talk about anything else people are interested in. So we're looking at the sternites. And gosh, I think there's some character of the sternites that is relatively unique, but I can't recall what it is. So anyway, I'll leave this up, but I believe we are done in terms of an introduction to some of the characters in the tricky pilosifrons producta group for Hoplitis. Are there any other questions?
We don't have anything in the chat. Doing a quick control F. I don't see anything in Discover Life, like a split character for anthocopoides. So now's your opportunity to unmute if you would like to do so.
Hoplitis, not a lot of comments.
I got something in characters. I don't know if this sets it apart from others, but here are some sternite things. S1 and S2 rim, median spine absent. S3 hair fringe, uniform throughout. S3 rim, entire, no dips in margin. Those are things that we have scored that refer to sternites.
Yep. And I think, again, depending on your ability to view the sternites, those are good characters because they split things like half and half. And if you can't see it, then you wouldn't use it.
True enough. So does this mean we're wrapping up a little early?
I think it might mean that.
Wow, look at us. Okay, well, as usual, if you have anything that comes up in your work, you can send us emails. And I guess we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, everybody.